Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the East Coast Rams podcast. I'm your co-host here, Ashton, with my awesome co-host Zach, and we have a special guest here to preview the big matchup of the West this week. A special Seahawks content creator from the Hawk's Eye podcast, Bryce. How are you doing, Bryce? How are you feeling? Happy Vets Day, by the way, for all veterans. Just how's it going?
It's going well. Thanks for having me on, guys. Looking forward to talking Seahawks Rams matchup here that could shape up to be the game of the year at this point.
Yeah, I definitely would not expect any less from these two high-powered teams coming off of, I would say, both kind of unexpected 7-2 starts for different reasons on both teams. But how are you doing, Zach? And see you're sporting some new wear there from this week. Oh, you're muted, Zach.
Yeah. Yeah, we went full midnight mode this week. So yeah, had to rep the midnight jersey. It looks pretty sharp. I will say, a lot of comments this week. It is blue. You know, a lot of controversy of is it blue or is it black? It is definitely blue. I will fight everyone to death about this. So yeah, everything's going great. Excited for this week. I'm also nervous about this week. I have so many emotions. I can't wait to talk about it all.
Yeah, so coming into this year, Bryce, first, I want to kind of get your breakdown on your personal feelings after Gino leaves. You guys end up getting Sam Darnold, a lot of moving pieces on the offensive side of the ball for you guys. I know a very young defense that was getting better at the second half of the year. What was your expectations coming into this year? What was your feelings about everything? And same thing for the fan base as a whole, kind of comparing your feelings versus the general Seahawks fan base.
It's a really interesting kind of situation for us coming into the season, because the Geno Smith conversation in its own right in Seattle was this really polarizing kind of thing within the fan base where you kind of had this bell curve. You had either people that thought Geno was a top 10 quarterback and the next franchise quarterback, or you had a group of individuals that were like, no, Geno's like not that. He is horrible. He is god awful. And then you had like this group of a bunch of us that were kind of like in the middle where we looked at Geno and we went, hey, like he's a good quarterback. He's a good franchise, bridge quarterback. And he'll give you some games where he's top 10, and then he'll give you some games where he's bottom, 15. And so when Seattle decided to pivot this offseason, what the thing for me that I thought about was, are you really going to pay a 35-year-old quarterback, $30+ million a year, and you don't know what that could turn out to look like? And obviously Vegas is kind of finding that out right now, that it's not exactly the greatest investment in the world. And then, talking, DK, Tyler Lockett, like what you really felt this offseason was this was Mike McDonald and John Schneider deciding this was going to be their team now and not this leftover of Pete Carroll's team. And there was some carryover from some players from Pete's era, Tyler being one, DK, that really bought into how Pete liked to run his team, which was very player freedom driven in a way. Mike McDonald, he's kind of come in with this John Harbaugh mentality of it's all about all of us together as one, but we come with a lunch pail, blue collar attitude. And you can see that in the way of the players they brought in. We're talking about DeMarcus Lawrence this offseason. They went and got him out of Dallas, and he, came up to Seattle, and everyone thought he was washed. Well, DeMarcus Lawrence right now is playing as one of the better edge defenders right now overall in the NFL. We ended up getting Cooper Kupp from you guys after you guys let Cooper go. And it wasn't like we were expecting to get Cooper Kupp triple crown, but they wanted the mentality and the work ethic to come in and help these young guys that needed to be able to flip that switch from what Pete did to what Mike does. And so what you're finally seeing is the image of what John Schneider has wanted for a very long time. And Colin Cowherd this week said it on his podcast, which I found really interesting, was there was a rift between John Schneider and Pete Carroll towards the end of their tenure together. Probably the last about 4 years, they were having rifts on, we cut Bobby Wagner. You guys pick up Bobby Wagner. Then we signed Bobby Wagner back. And it was like, was this like, how did that all happen that we ended up losing Bobby for one season to LA just to get him back the following year. Like it was a weird situation. And what you find to hear is that John and Pete were basically kind of arguing within the organization. And this is why John, a few years ago, almost ended up going to Detroit, because he wanted more control. Well, now you're seeing what John Schneider's done. And so when I look at, the decisions they made, this is John Schneider's team now. It's John Schneider's organization in a lot of ways. And you're kind of seeing that image now come to life. And, as a Seahawks fan, I was okay with it. And as someone that covers the team and likes to be involved in it, I was okay with the change because it had gotten so stale. And it was like, okay, this is either going to work and it's going to be great, or we're going to completely bottom out and we'll have an ability to reset and rebuild that way. And so I think for a lot of Seahawks fans, we were tired of being stuck kind of in purgatory, which was, hey, we'll win 9 games and miss the playoffs. But at the same time, we're not getting to any closer to being a division champion or a team that can potentially look at an NFC conference championship or even a Super Bowl appearance.
Yeah, and the tough thing about those situations is when you set mediocrity, it kind of like it almost becomes the culture of the team, and it becomes reinforcing. You see this with a lot of, let's say, NFC East teams and like AFC South teams. So it can be really tough to get out of that culture. You almost need a complete wipe of like the front office and like almost the roster in those types of situations. I would say rarely do you see such a toxic or negative culture like get revamped up, if that kind of makes sense.
Yep.
So what's the fan base as a like overall? What was the expectation for this year?
The expectation, I think, for this team after how the defense played last year towards the back half, after we got Ernest Jones, we shipped out our linebackers, and Mike McDonald's defense started to take kind of stride, was this team should be a playoff caliber football team. They won 10 games last year. We expect them to win, 9 to 10 games again this year and be a team where we can compete with the 49ers for either second and try and win the division. Like that was kind of the goal. It was like, we need to get ahead of the 49ers and get into that second spot, and maybe we can challenge the Rams for the division title towards the end of the season, because the expectation by a lot of Seahawks fans was this offense was going to take half the season to get going. We were expecting it just like last year's defense with Mike. Hey, it's going to take, got all these new moving pieces in here. You got a new quarterback, new, offensive coordinator, new entire offensive staff practically. This is going to take some time to get going. So we figured there were going to be some kind of hiccups along the way in the first half of the season up until the bye week. And so I think what you've seen now is a switch in the fact that this team, and I think this is why you saw the trade that they made with Rashid Shaheed, this, trade deadline, is they are basically, I think, a year ahead now of where they expected to be as an organization. I think they had a 3-year outlook of, this is going to be a soft 3-year reset. Year 1 was obviously last year. Year 2, we get into being a, playoff team. And year 3, now we're contending really for the division title with the Rams or the 49ers, whoever it ends up being at that point, and really starting to kind of press for NFC, royalty and being at the top. Now where they are currently, they're, I think, ahead of schedule than where they expected to be, and even where the fan base, I think, expected them to be in the whole scheme of things.
Mm-hmm. Now, talking about how the season has gone, what has been your general reaction? So, like, you guys, I would say, I believe your strength of schedule was kind of in the middle coming into the season. And you guys had a few marquee matchups that you kind of circled before going into season. You would say the 49ers probably won, the Bucks being a big game, and then, of course, the Rams and probably the Texans before the season, and what a dumpster fire that organization has been. How has your reaction been to kind of like this hot start, but some, let's say, early stumbles along the way?
I think the thing that I have to look at with, when I look at the early stumbles, for example, the 2 losses to the 49ers and the loss to the Buccaneers, yeah, I would be more concerned with those losses if we had lost by 10 points or more in each of those games. Losing as we did to the 49ers, where we were basically down on the 10-yard line, 7-yard line, and Nick Bosa makes an all-pro level play, taking a right tackle and running him into Sam Darnold, causing the fumble. That, again, I look at it and I go, yes, it's a divisional game. There's funny bounces. It's also week 1 of the NFL season. it sucked because I think the Seahawks are actually a better team than the 49ers, roster construction wise and all. But it sucked to lose that game. And then we bounced back, obviously, go on a bit of a run, and then we play the Buccaneers. And the Buccaneer game, we end of the game interception. And a lot of people look at it and they go, a lot of the national media, I should say, looked at it and went, oh, well, there's Sam Darnold being Sam Darnold and costing you a game. And I looked at it and I went, the ball bounces off a defensive lineman's helmet. You've got the linebacker holding Cooper Kupp because he's beat, and it ends up falling in his lap because he turns around and he's in the right place at the right time. Like, it wasn't like an egregious misread throwing into double coverage kind of interception. And so I looked at, okay, we lose on a game, ending field goal. I don't look at those and be like, this is horrible. Now, at the same token, there are things about this team that I'm still kind of searching to see if it'll get going. One being our running game. The biggest thing that was preached to us this offseason was, hey, we're getting Clint Kubiak, John Benton, Rick Dennison. This group is going to be able to run the football. Like, that's going to be our identity. Well, we have a lot of rushing attempts. We just don't have a lot of rushing success. And, last game was probably our best rushing performance this season. And yes, it came against the Cardinals. Yes, it came in a blowout victory. But the biggest thing for me about it that showed some positivity for it was the fact that we were running the ball successfully when they knew we were trying to bleed the clock and kill the game because we were up by so much. So I'd say for me, the first half of the season has been, I had them at the bye being 5-2. So they ended up being, when I did my preseason projection, roughly that. So it's kind of where they are. The game, actually, it's funny. You talk about the Texans game. I had 3 games circled for me in the first 10 weeks of the season that I went, these are the games Seattle has to show up and play well. One was that 49ers game. The other one was, to your point, the Buccaneers game, Ashton. The third game, or third game out of the 4 was the Commanders game. Because I expected the Commanders, after where they had finished last year in the NFC, championship game, to be the team that could potentially be a lot better than what they were. And you're seeing, a lot of their aging players. Big disappointment. And so that was the other one. And then it was like, okay, how are we going to come out of that bye and play the Commanders? And then how are we going to handle the Rams 2 weeks later? That was kind of it for me, where I went like, how is that transition? Because basically for me, I look at this Rams game and I go, this is going to set you up for the back half of the season, because you don't want to go into this game being roughly 500 or maybe a game above 500. And then you're trying to play catch up during the second half when, as you can tell, there's teams like the Colts now. We play you guys again. There's a bunch of stuff in the back where you kind of go, there's a game here or there that you could drop just randomly because it is the NFL. Those are the games you need to kind of win. So, like, it matched up kind of where I thought it would be, but there's still things that worry me.
Yeah, you guys face like 3 Jekyll and Hyde teams where you could get like the Vikings, the Falcons, and Panthers. Who knows what mystery box team you're going to get when you play them? They can be elite, or they can completely fall on their face and you can blow them out. But going over this Seahawks team, and you mentioned the rushing, what exactly about this rushing attack has you worried and struggling? I know when you're looking through the averages, like Kenneth Walker's doing solid average-wise, 4.5 a carry, 540 yards on the season. Zach Chardonnay getting a lot of touchdowns, but his average is decently low, 3.3. Is it a line issue? Is it a running back issue? I know as a fantasy owner of Walker, I would appreciate them giving him the ball a little bit more in the red zone. But does he need more of a workload, or what exactly would you say is the issue there?
I think what you've got a team that last year with Ryan Grubb had no running identity. And you carried a lot of those players over. You carried Charles Cross over. And again, this is the thing I think with the rushing attack that is taking some time in Seattle is we had Shane Waldron, who was trying to instill some of what Sean McVay did with the wide zone system when he was our offensive coordinator for a couple of seasons there. Then we pivoted to Ryan Grubb last year, and we had no real run identity. 1 week we were a zone team. The next week we were purely gap power. And then some weeks we were this mix mash of everything. Now you've got an offensive staff that has come in and said, this is what we do. We are going to be a outside zone team or wide zone team, and then we'll sprinkle in some of the other stuff, but that is going to be our identity. Well, part of it is you got to make sure you have the right pieces on that O-line. Charles Cross and Abe Lucas are fine tackles for that. They, can do those things, and they're really good pass protectors. The key was getting Gray Zabel, and the key now is figuring out, okay, your center, and your right guard. And Anthony Bradford has been someone that has been multiple times criticized in Seattle because people look at him and go, he can't play right guard. He's horrible. And you see the videos thrown out on social media of him whiffing on blocks constantly and everything. The thing about Anthony Bradford, and I've been one of the people that's been critical of him. I'm not going to shy away from that. But the thing for me about it with Anthony Bradford is he is built more for gap power than he is for zone, because zone requires you to get to that second level. How am I going to take the first guy and then be able to communicate it off with my partner that I'm going with and work up to that second level to cut off the backer or the overflow? And he's getting better at it, but he's just a very large guy. And when you look at all offensive lines, and I'm sure with you guys in the Rams, you can circle one guy on your offensive line and go, yeah, he's probably the weakest link on our O-line. We got to kind of figure out a way to manage him. Well, that's kind of how Seattle's been. And I think for the running attack, what you're seeing is you have two very also distinctively different running backs. Ken Walker is explosive. Charbonnet is pounded. And you're seeing that being used throughout Seattle. Like Charbonnet's really our goal line back now. Ken Walker's more the open field guy. It'll be interesting to see what Seattle does in this game and how the change at center might affect Seattle's run game. Because the one thing with Jalen Sundell, who is the undrafted guy that we had last year and brought in and someone I was really high on, he was teammates with Gray Zabel at North Dakota State, is he's the better athlete of our two centers by far. But he struggles to anchor and he struggles to get a good push right away. Olu Oluwatimi, who we drafted out of Michigan and we've had on our roster for a few years, he was our starting center the back half of last year after Connor Williams retired. He is probably as good of a pass protector as Sundell, but he's probably a better run blocker. And he's, in my opinion, understands fronts a little bit better for a guy that is a pure center. Sundell can play all five spots if you need him to. He's like a super sub. Olu is strictly a center. He was a center for Jim Harbaugh at Michigan, which is not an easy thing to do because Jim Harbaugh is very much on his offensive line, as we've seen with the Chargers. So it'll be interesting to see how Olu does this week, especially against you guys in your front with Poona Ford, ex-Seahawk, who has been playing phenomenal for you guys, and Braden Fisk there are going to definitely pose a challenge for this run game to get going.
Yeah, I find it interesting that, you say that Kenneth Walker is kind of your more explosive guy and Charbonnet is more of your goal line, smash it in. When those two roles, Kenneth Walker gets more carries, obviously, than Charbonnet. And in the Rams, it's kind of vice versa. You have Kyron Williams, who's really kind of the more pounded in. He's going to get those yards. Goal line, he's pretty golden as far as getting TDs. But then you look at, Blake Corum, who's more explosive, kind of in the open field. He tends to get less carries than Kyron. Just that dynamic is interesting of a flip-flop.
Yeah, it's something in Seattle, I think and the one thing they've got going, like for Ken Walker, that's something that I don't think has been publicly put out there a lot. I had Greg Bell, who's a Seattle beat reporter here, been doing it for years on my show a few weeks ago, and he kind of mentioned that Ken Walker is still dealing with a foot injury. He had it through the back half of training camp, but it's a foot injury that's linked to his high ankle sprain he had late last season. And so Seattle's kind of doing this weird thing where they're trying to manage that so it doesn't flare up on Ken Walker, because realistically, I think you're seeing more of that managed with Ken Walker because Kenny McIntosh, who came on late last year when Ken went down with Charbonnet during the back half and we saw a bit of a run game revival in Seattle, he blew out his knee, unfortunately, in a non-contact in training camp. So now they're kind of really with their two. You've got kind of the two top backs in Charbonnet and Walker, and then you got our third back in George Halani. But Halani last year didn't get a lot of run in the regular season. He had sporadic moments as more of a special teams guy if he did get brought up onto the roster. And he got some touches last game, which was good to see because now they're trying to incorporate a third running back into this rotation, which I think ultimately he brings something different that neither of them have because he's almost a mix of the two. So you can put him in there and he can do a little bit of what Charbonnet does, but he can also do a little bit of what Ken does. So it'll make things interesting to see if that can spark this run game with more efficiency over the back half of the season.
How are your running backs? I'm kind of looking through some of the stats, and you look at Kenneth Walker and you look at Charbonnet as far as a receiver end. They're kind of on the lower end of the tier, where the Rams tend to really utilize, at least Kyron Williams in the pass game. How do you analyze that situation?
It's really interesting because we all kind of thought Clint Kubiak was going to use these running backs a lot because he did that a lot with Kamara and that group in New Orleans last year. And so it's been an interesting thing that it started to come on a little bit in the Houston game and the Commanders game, and even in this game a little bit, but it's something that's very interesting. And I don't know if it has to do with because they run so much play action, as a very big staple of our passing game is play action based. That's why the running backs getting out into routes isn't necessarily something that's high on the priority list for Kubiak to get them involved in the passing game. And I think he also looks at it and goes, we have two really good tight ends in AJ Barner and Elijah Arroyo. We now have Shaheed here. We have Torrey Horton, Cooper Kupp, JSN. How many touches are we going to take away from that group of targets to give to our running backs? And so I think that's how they kind of view it right now. And so it'll be interesting to see, again, over the back half, if there are some adjustments to that where they go, hey, we need to get Ken Walker more involved in the passing game, or a Zach Charbonnet, and leak them out into it. But part of it is too, is the speed at which Sam Darnold's getting the ball out and going through his reads and finding targets. It almost makes the check down to the running back, null and void, because he's getting the ball out in almost under 3 seconds most of the time.
Yeah, which, I mean, does not signal well, at least for this Rams defense, who really wants to try to get home and really want to provide, some PTSD to Sam Darnold a little bit from the last season.
Yeah. So kind of going into these pass catchers on the Seahawks offense, there's a few recognizable names that Rams fans will know, especially with Cooper Kupp. But JSN has been on a heater. He's had an amazing year, up there as one of the top wide receivers in the league now. And then you guys have a bunch of young players kind of jumping in there and fulfilling some roles. A few guys that I was dying for the Rams to draft, Arroyo and Torrey Horton. Zach couldn't hear enough of me just wanting us to draft both of those guys. And I feel like they have both played fantastic for y'all. What's been the impact of these younger players in this receiving core and such a change from last, let's say, 4 or 5 years with your previous wide receiver core?
I think what you're seeing a group that complements each other really well in Seattle, and a group that I would say, if you looked at Seattle's receiving core, maybe the past 4 years. So you go to Tyler Lockett, DK Metcalf were really the main staples. We had Godwin here for a little bit. Then we got JSN got brought in. What you're seeing, though, is we had Tyler on the back end of his career at that point. And so Tyler was really catch and get down. That was what Tyler did. You didn't see a lot of yak yards out of Tyler. You saw what we used to call a lot of roll yards out of Tyler. He catches and rolls on the ground. DK was very much your deep threat. Like, DK was run the post, run the go, the fly route, the hook, the slant. You weren't getting DK on a bunch of in routes or, outbreakers and stuff like that. It's just not part of his game because he wasn't as fluid getting in and out of his breaks. What you've seen now with this offensive turnaround this year in the passing game is you're seeing receivers that are very much interchangeable in spots. JSN and Cooper Kupp, the big thing when we signed Cooper Kupp this offseason from everybody was, well, you have two receivers with the exact same skill set. Like, that's just not going to work for your passing attack. Like, you're going to struggle with. Well, no, like, this means we can do different things with condensed splits. We can move them around. We can interchange pieces. Everyone was, clamoring in for Seattle. We need a big X receiver. Well, in this West Coast offense, you really don't, because your big target generally is your tight ends. Hence the Elijah Arroyo pick, the emergence of AJ Barner in the passing game, even more so this year than to the back half of last year. What you see with this group, though, is they are much better at running routes and running the entire route tree, as that would be as well. Like, you can put Torrey Horton in and he can run all of the same routes as JSN. He may not run them to the exact detail of JSN, but you're not losing things out of your playbook where you go, okay, hey, we put in this package right now. We've got Cooper out there. We've got Torrey Horton. We need to give JSN a break. So we've got those two. Well, we can't call 20 of these plays because, Torrey Horton can't run these routes, or he's not going to run these routes as effectively as we need. You're getting more complementary play throughout the group, which then in turn opens up your offensive playbook throughout the game.
Do you see it an issue that it seems like JSN has, a third of the receptions compared to the rest of the team? Do you see him like having too many?
It's an interesting conversation, Zach, because right now, if you look at the target, percentage, He's currently sitting at 35% of the passing targets are going to JSN right now. Like, it started to come down a bit because there was a point he was up in the 40s, and it was like, even in Seattle, we were like, okay, like, you need to get somebody else involved. Now, the one thing I'll say, though, is the reason he's seeing that is JSN is just so good at getting open. Like, that is the biggest thing for him right now. And I think it's just speaks more to Sam's progression to be able to get through it, whether it's JSN's the first or the third read. He's just getting open and Sam's just finding him at this point. And I think what made it so interesting was when JSN started this heater, and it basically started from week 1 and hasn't really stopped, is that I expected teams to go, okay, Seattle's run game really isn't getting anywhere. Let's roll back into 2 high shells and try and take away and bracket JSN and take him away. We'll play a safety inside and we'll have our corner play on the outside shade and we'll try and really funnel him in. Teams haven't done that. They've stuck with the single high look a majority of the time and played stacked boxes versus Seattle and let JSN kind of go to work. And so it's just been this interesting. Now, what I think will happen is the Rashid Shaheed effect will take over. And we saw it a bit in the Cardinals game is he is such a deep threat that he will just blow by you. He's probably one of the best deep threats right now in the NFL. And to a point, you guys have a great deep threat on your team in Tutu Atwell, who's currently not playing. I know he's injured, but when he's in your guys' offense, it opens up things for Puka to work on the inside and stuff, forces teams to have to respect that deep threat because otherwise he's going to go by you. So I think what you'll see, Zach, is you'll see the numbers tick up a little bit for Cooper Kupp, for some of these tight ends, because teams will start to get to that too high look because they're afraid of Shaheed. They'll lighten the box and it'll allow Seattle to find some of these other holes and windows because the pressure won't be so quick and forcing Sam to get that ball out so quick to JSN.
Yeah, I mean, I was just going through it. JSN almost has 3 times as many as the next receiver, which is Cooper Kupp. I think we look at it as the Rams fans, we have Puka Nacua, so a similar area where he can catch anything and anywhere. And if he didn't play for a game in 2 halves, he probably would have almost 90 receptions at this point. And so we know that. We tend to have that breakout star. Look at Cooper Kupp, back in 2021. So we're very used to that. I'm just curious on your guys' thought process for that. Ashton, what you got?
I was just gonna kind of pivot to the defense, and then we can talk more about like Bryce, your like take on the Rams and what you kind of want to learn from us, from our perspective. But this defense, elite. Just been playing at a high clip. Haven't been facing a lot of high-powered offenses, but you guys have done a good job, really, outside of from what I can tell, that Bucs game. That Bucs game is the one outlier, you could really say. Everyone else has been around 20 points. What exactly has this defense humming, and what about that Bucs game really challenged the defense and caused it to kind of break down?
I'll start with the Bucs game. The one thing you saw in the Bucs game was a couple of key players weren't on that defense. One being DeMarcus Lawrence, which was huge because DeMarcus Lawrence as a run-setting edge, and now what he is even bringing in this pass rush with this group of 4 that we've kind of this rotation of a 4-man rush that we've got. That was a big factor missing. We also didn't have Julian Love in that game. That was one of Tayakata's kind of first starts, really starting in that game as a true safety for us. So we lost our top communicator, and we also in that game didn't have Devin Witherspoon. So you have those guys going in that you're not going to have. Then in that game, we lose at that point one of our best pass rushers in Derek Hall. I think it was halfway through the first quarter, we lost Derek Hall. And then we just kind of couldn't create any pressure. We had just gotten Chenna Nwosu back. Chenna got 1 sack, but like what it did for Mike, and I think this is something Mike McDonald brought up even on his coach's show following that game, was he didn't have them prepared well enough to play that game in case we did lose somebody. And I think Mike even looked at his own philosophy and went, I need to do a better job of in-game adjustments in case I lose someone in-game so we don't completely fall apart, because our defense in that game basically became like Swiss cheese. We were just getting picked apart the whole game. And it's funny because it was almost a parallel to exactly what happened with the 49ers. They went in with a game plan for Nick Emanwari, Eamon got hurt 4 plays into that game, and they had to put Ty Okada in Nick Eamon spot playing this big nickel kind of role, and the 49ers picked on him all game with George Kittle until we got out of it. What that game did, though, is it really, I think, put a thorn in Mike Macdonald's side because, one, he doesn't like to lose like any coach, but he doesn't like to have his defense get embarrassed. That is a pride thing for him. And since that game, our defense has been on a complete heater, and he's changed some things. He's bringing more pressure, which is something we were one of the lowest blitzing teams. We still are at blitz rate, but he's doing it a little bit more. The tick has gone up a little bit, and that is what you see now coming in. He's getting Nick Eamon back. He's now got Devin Witherspoon back. He's got Derek Hall and the defensive line back together. So now you're seeing Mike Macdonald get more and more into his bag. And that's the one thing. But the biggest thing for this group is they are so good at stopping the run. And then it puts these teams in, longer second downs and third downs. And then it allows this defensive line to get going. And it allows Mike to really get into his sim pressure packages where, hey, it looks like we're bringing 6, but really we're only bringing 4. And there may be a stunt in there or there may not be. But you also don't know which 4 are coming. He may drop DeMarcus Lawrence into coverage and shoot a safety off the edge that your tackle's not expecting to have be the guy coming on the rush. So the thing with our defense is it's just so multiple, which when you guys played us, when we had Pete Carroll, we were very traditional cover 3, 4-3 defense, a little bit of cover 1 in there, a little bit of cover 4, but that's what we were. And so it allowed guys like Matthew Stafford and Jared Goff to really pick apart that defense. And then we try and bring pressure, and they just left these huge gaping holes in behind. You look at what Mike Macdonald likes to do. We play cover 6 at the second highest rate in the NFL right now, which is one of the things Matthew Stafford, ironically, is not the greatest against is cover 6, especially off of play action when he has to turn his back to the defense. So it'll be really interesting to see how this defense goes up against what personnel you guys bring out this week, especially with what you're doing with tight ends, and how that affects how Seattle's going to have to change some of their sub packages.
Well, real quickly, since you brought that up, guys, if you're watching us, please like and subscribe and comment down below what you guys think will be the biggest moment in this game, what will be the biggest factor, and thank everyone for commenting by. We might get to your comments, but we got a hard stop, so we're trying to get everything packed in as much as possible. But Bryce, going into this game, the Rams had a big change of philosophy in the last 2 or 3 weeks that they kind of found by accident a little bit. Traditionally, when the Rams have lost a big player like Puka or Cooper Kupp back in days, they would backfill someone, and kind of like what you mentioned with Torrey Horton, he can run the same routes, just won't be as good, or just like will be a watered down version, a little bit more simplistic offense for the backfields or younger players. They're doing something completely different. They kind of shocked, for the most part, the fan base with how they came out and played against the Jags with this completely different style and this different philosophy of offense. What's your initial take on that, and what has you worried? And what questions do you have for us?
So it's interesting for me because the personnel, what you guys are doing, this is what makes Sean McVay so good, and what I love for as an offensive mind is he's so good at finding new wrinkles that allow him the same ability to run his offense, but gives him flexibility in a way. And it's really weird to talk about that when we're talking about like 13 personnel and we're talking about adding extra tight ends, but he's still getting the same concepts out and the effectiveness of it. And the one thing I love about Sean McVay is Sean McVay's boot action concepts, where he will fake the zone, they'll boot out of it, and those over and under routes that layer in behind and in front of linebackers with the clear out route by somebody, running the post or the deep in. He does that so well. And I would say that's the biggest concern I have, is how is Seattle going to match up in occasion with these 13 personnel and 14 personnel looks that you guys may bring out at different points. But how are we going to stop that particular base play for Sean McVay? Because he will spam that throughout a game in different formations. But when Sean finds a pressure point, he pushes it and pushes it and pushes it until you find a way to make it stop bleeding. And that's where it's going to be really interesting to see what Mike Macdonald does to combat that, because he's probably got the best version of this defense right now, except missing Julian Love and potentially Ernest Jones. Hopefully he's back to handle some of that because of how athletic and fast we are. Nick Eamon-Warry becomes a bit of an interesting matchup and chess piece in this, because his man coverage skills have been a little lacking so far this year, which is kind of a concern, but he is still playing well for a rookie. He is such an athletic freak that you can put him on a tight end and he can take a tight end out of the game. So is that the piece we use? Is it rolling down a safety into the box more frequently? Like, how are we going to combat that? And then at the same time, be able to sustain not giving up some of those plays. The other biggest concern for me in this game, guys, honestly, from Seattle's perspective, is just tackling. Seattle, for as good of a defense that they've been, they have a lot of missed tackles this year. And the one thing that's driven me nuts when we play the Rams, even back to the Pete Carroll day, is you guys running that boot play, flipping it to your tight end 3 yards across the line of scrimmage, and then watching a Tyler Higbee or a Gerald Everett or any one of those guys break a tackle and go 30 yards down the sidelines and really make it into an explosive play. Seattle is going to have to minimize the amount of explosive plays they give up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's a very key point that a lot of fan bases, besides the ones that have kind of watched the Rams in the last 2 or 3 weeks, they don't understand that our personnel packages aren't dictating what plays we can call. They're dictating what defenses can come out in. And in our 13 personnel, we can throw it on you. In our 11 personnel, we can run it on you. Our wide receivers can play like tight ends and vice versa. And that is causing these defenses, if you load up on linebackers, well, okay, we'll just throw to one of our 4 tight ends that can catch pretty well effectively. You mentioned the former Gamecock Nick, and that's a good idea. Problem with you doing that is then you put Puka Nacua one-on-one on a corner, or Devontae Adams. So, like, that's where you get put in a really tough position. If you're bringing a safety come down extra help, especially on these tight ends, then you leave one of our star wide receivers one-on-one, and they're going to win 9 times out of 10, and both of them can go deep. So we don't have Tutu, but we still have deep threats. It's so varied, and the complexity, and you mix that in with the fact that he's doing all of this with motions in both personnel sets and going back and forth. It is a living nightmare for a defensive coordinator, and you can't really have a lot of right answers. And I think it's a specific personnel thing that a team has to have. I think they have to have like 3 or 4 really, really good linebackers to be able to stop a scheme like this, or at least like 4 or 5 really big physical safeties.
And that's the interesting thing with Seattle. Like right now, Tyler Cotta is playing as a top 7 safety statistically right now in the NFL. You've got Nick Eamon-Warry, who's kind of your big nickel dime linebacker in sets. Tyrese Knight's finally healthy, which is something we've been wondering what was going on with Tyrese Knight as well. The thing I'll say about Seattle, like to your point, Ashton, with them if they do roll a safety down in certain looks, and yes, you guys have Devontae Adams and Puka Nacua, we also do have probably 2 of the more elite corners in the NFL in Reek Woolen and Devin Witherspoon on the outside. And this is where, again, Mike Macdonald's defense is so much different than the ones you guys, even to last year's point, played against us, especially in that first matchup, is Josh Jobs played probably as one of the top 15 corners in the NFL in his own right, with Reek having issues and such. Reek's been back to playing like how he was as a rookie the last 2 weeks. This is where that chess match between McVay and Macdonald is going to get really interesting, because it will be interesting if they do roll that safety down and they do try and go to one-on-one matchups, how frequently, because I agree with you. If this was the 49ers or this was the Cardinals or anything, you guys are winning those matchups 9 times out of 10, because they just don't have the defensive backs to play with you, especially on the outside. Like Devontae Adams is going to cook, whoever they've got. I can't even think of any of the Cardinals corners right now because they're all practically injured. But you now put Reek out there. You now put Devin Witherspoon out there, and they're both physical corners that like to bump and run. This kind of does play into what can disrupt enough of your guys' route running for those guys, because as much as they can take the top off, we both, I think at least all of us know that Puka Nacua and Devontae Adams are probably some of the more elite route runners because of how good they are in and out of their breaks. They can go over the top, but they're so good at their route running. That's what separates them from, say, speed guys like a Rashid Shaheed, for example, in Seattle, who really is a better over-the-top player than he is a route runner.
Do you guys think that you guys are going to overcompensate for Puka and Devontae, which then will end up leaving somebody else open, whether that's through our tight ends or going, falling back to whether it's Kyron, who's typically our pass rush for RB? How do you anticipate the defense playing to those guys?
I think if Devontae Adams was truly 100% healthy, that would be more interesting, because I think they will probably, again, it'll depend on how much Mike trusts his corners. And if he can say, hey, I can leave you guys, the safeties can kind of play and watch the tight ends and help out inside. Like, there's going to be a lot of trust in this game and guys to do their job. And I would say that's the one thing Mike's going to probably do more of in this game than maybe he's done in the past, is let these guys go play and prove that they can handle what the Rams are going to throw at them. And Mike will put them in positions and call things, but I don't know if Mike's going to completely change what we do and what we do well to completely play the Rams, in the sense of he's not going to change us out of a 4-2-5 look all the time. He's not going to put us in like a 4-4. Like, he may do it sporadically to throw different looks, but I think there's two things in this game that he's banking on. He is banking on his front four getting home and creating disruption for Matthew Stafford and stopping the run. And he's going to bank on Reek Wallen and Devin Witherspoon being able to, yes, you're going to give up plays. I'm not at all being one of the Seahawks people is going to say there's no way Devin Witherspoon and Reek Wallen are going to give up plays to Puka Nacua and Devontae Adams. But it is, again, it's that limiting of the explosive plays, Zach. And if we do leave those guys outside and don't necessarily overcompensate for covering Puka and Devontae, trusting that Reek and Spoon can make enough plays throughout the game to give us a chance at the final point.
That's awesome. Yeah, no, it's good. Last question for me. Do you think that this is, kind of looking at the Seahawks schedule and who you've played so far, and maybe outside of the Bucks and the 49ers week 1, do you think this is the toughest challenge they've had to face in these first half of the season?
Yes, I think it is. I think this game in its whole entirety is going to be Seattle's toughest game this season to deal with, because you guys are almost in some respects a carbon copy of what we do well. What we do on offense with motion and different formations and creating space for guys. Clint Kubiak, I've been saying it for the last couple of weeks now. He's kind of the Jekyll and Hyde of the Shanahan McVay style of West Coast offense, because there's things he's clearly taken that Kevin O'Connell and McVay have do well because of Jake Peets, who we have as our passing game coordinator. So he understands the nuances of your guys' passing philosophy. But what he's done is he's almost married it to Kyle Shanahan's running philosophy. And you're kind of getting this hybrid offense where when you look at the Seahawks in their passing game, it is very, very similar to what McVay does with Puka because of JSN and how similar their skill sets are and some of the other weapons. But then when you go to the run game, it's so much more like Kyle Shanahan in the wide zone and the use of the fullback and some of the other things. Like we have Robbie Utes, who I think will be an underrated X factor in this game and has been since he's come back. Seattle's run game has had a success rate of 51% over the last 2 weeks. Big part of that, Robbie Utes coming back into the fold. We didn't have him for 4 weeks there at the mid stretch. Now that we have him, that's a huge thing. So that's where I look at this when we look at this matchup. For me, they are so evenly matched. This game for me, I think it's eerily similar to me for Seattle in 2012 when they played the 49ers. And the first time they played the 49ers that year, they lost 13-6, and it was like this boring, I think it was a Thursday night game. It was boring. It was a slobber knocker. It wasn't an exciting football game. Later on in that year, Seattle won and blew the 49ers out in home in a game where Cam Chancellor has the infamous hit on Vernon Davis where he just knocks him sideways. That was when Seattle, I think, finally in their mind went, hey, we can play with these guys. We're in the same class as guys. The 49ers ended up going to the Super Bowl that year anyway and losing to Baltimore, but it kind of catapulted that team into 2013 to being like, yeah, we aren't the little brother to the 49ers anymore. We're equal. That's what this game is for me in the Seattle point. For the Rams, I think this is a game of we need to put a statement that this is still our division and that we are the best team in the NFC. For Seattle, it's we deserve to be in that conversation kind of game right now. And I
Yeah,
think the rematch. Sorry, go ahead, Ashton.
I was just gonna say, I think in general, I think regardless of who wins this game, both of these teams, from my point of view, are going to be going to at least a divisional. I feel like there's too much talent on both teams, and they're both executing at such a high level. I really doubt that either of these teams really have like a collapse, so to say, near the end. You could say a Cardinals like collapse that we've seen from them a few years in a row. But just to reiterate, kind of like what you were saying, it's definitely a fascinating matchup from both teams because both their offenses and defenses have been so elite. Um, it's going to be really a kind of grinded out game and like who can tough it out and make the least amount of mistakes. I think that's what's going to come down to. That I don't think there's going to be a lot of turnovers this game, but there's going to be one or two, and the team that commits those two or that one turnover is probably going to lose the game, whether that's a fumble or interception or, you know, silly things can happen. So it is just impeccable, like the positioning of these teams, and whether you're a player or not, it kind of doesn't really matter. You just have to get to the dance and then start playing hot. And I feel like both these teams are capable of doing that.
I totally agree. And the thing for me is I look at the time, like when I look at this matchup, last year's last game of the season, I kind of throw into almost like a preseason category in a weird way. Cause at that point you guys had Jimmy Garoppolo, you had won the 5th tiebreaker in that to get into the playoffs. You know, there was a bunch of things in that game where it didn't really have that much meaning to it. Yes, it's a divisional game, but it just didn't. I look at the game in Seattle last year, and then I go back to the Ravens-Rams game the year before, where you guys went into Baltimore and gave Mike McDonald's fits with your offense. And I look at those two and I go, okay, this is really round 3 for Sean and Mike in their matchup of matching wits. The other thing I look at with that is when we played you guys in Seattle last year, there were 3 passes that Matthew Stafford basically threw into our lap, and we couldn't convert on any of them. There was an Ernest Jones opportunity, and he couldn't get the pick. Reek Wolin had an opportunity. I can't remember the other player that had an opportunity. We had 3 opportunities to get a hand on the ball and create a turnover, and we missed out on it. And to your point, Ashton, us missing out on those and then Geno committing the 2 red zone interceptions cost us that football game. Matthew Stafford, as amazing as he is, and I think, in my opinion, everyone always wants to talk about Aaron Rodgers being the best pure passer of a football. My hat goes to Matthew Stafford. I think he is the best pure passer of a football that we maybe have ever seen since Dan Marino. Not saying Aaron Rodgers isn't good, but some of the stuff Matthew can do with a football is absolutely phenomenal.
Oh, it's
and
nuts.
He has that gunslinger mentality to a point where he will sometimes try and fit it into a window that is ridiculously tight, and it'll give the other team. And he did even in the San Francisco game. I think it was Green, their corner, had an opportunity at an interception, and he dropped it. You can't do that versus you guys. You have to capitalize on those, because if you don't, you're giving McVay and Stafford another bite at the apple. You want to limit those bites at the apple for them, because if they get too many of those, that will end up biting you at the end of the game.
Yeah, and Stafford is definitely playing at an MVP caliber level. This guy is just on something else differently. You mix the scheme with a guy who can fit it in any arm angle, any amount of time, and he's getting out super quick. Pressure is not able to get there. Our line has only just recently been playing decently better, and like they've been run blocking good, and then just looking over this overall offense is just everything has been firing on all cylinders on top of defense. So I definitely agree with you. Can you trick Stafford? And it's hard to trick him. He's seen a lot of stuff. And especially this year, teams haven't been able to figure it out given the scheme and the kind of binds that McVay is putting them in. And Stafford can make a lot of things correct when McVay gets them wrong, and vice versa. And tricking both of those guys at the same time, not a lot of teams have done that. And like, I know a lot of Seahawks fans have memory of last year. This team is twice as better offensively than that team last year. That's just reality. We don't have red zone issues like we did last year. We were one of the bottom teams in red zone. Offensively, points wise, we were in the bottom 10. We were basically a defensive team that made clutch drives at end the games to win in most of our games. And the only game we had an offensive explosion was the Bills game. This team is a lot different. I would say we should be 6-1, beating the 49ers the first time and beating the Eagles, but losing. We should have probably lost to the Colts. In all reality, we should be 7-1, and it was the special teams that really has been the biggest difference. And Sean McVay, people have already lost their jobs mid-season because of this. So we're kind of seeing a transformation on special teams, and we'll see if that's an impact. Because if that's an impact, that can be same thing as a turnover, the big key difference maker and why you guys win this game if you end up winning it.
Yeah, and that's the one thing for us that's kind of been, I'd say the biggest surprise in Seattle is our special teams unit being one of the best in the NFL this year. A lot of people early on in the year in preseason, me being one of them, was saying like, Jay Harbaugh, if he doesn't get the special teams right, is going to be on the hot seat real quick because of how bad our unit was last year. It's turned into one of the best units in the NFL this year. And I think it gives us a huge, kind of advantage in a way, is having that in a game this close, having that solid special teams unit that you can bank on with the punting and the kicker, all those kind of things, our coverage units. It can be sometimes as, the big crucial part. And in 2 of our games this year, we've had key special teams moments that have completely created runaways for us. The Pittsburgh game, we had the weird kickoff where the guy didn't want to touch it, and we ended up falling on it for a touchdown. And at that point, that game was only, I think, 17-10. We got that touchdown. Now we're up 24-10, and the whole game just went away from Pittsburgh. And then even in the Washington Commanders game, we get we're up 14-0. We kick off. We just had scored, and Brandon Peely knocks out a ball on a return. We get the ball, and one play later, Elijah Arroyo scores, and we're up 21-0 before the first quarter is almost over. Like, that's where our special teams unit has gifted us extra possessions and abilities at extra bites at that apple to be successful. The one thing I'll say is, I agree, your guys' offense is way better than it was last year. Your offensive line, to me, is still kind of especially on some of the tackles, like Havenstein, I think it is your right tackle still. That's where I'd say on your offense is your weakness still a little bit, is this offensive line, especially on the tackle portion, just dealing with speed rush and edges and stunts. But Seattle's defense from last year is so much better off than when we played you guys in the same respect, because you have all these guys know McDonald's system and have been in it, and now they're playing with more of the playbook than they did. Because really last year, when we played you guys, we were basically playing base defense most of the time. And Mike's alluded to it in his end of the season press conference last year, being like, yeah, we had to kind of go back to basics with our defense and start from scratch again halfway through the season. And that's what's making this game so much more exciting for me, is we're seeing a better version of your guys' offense, and we're seeing a better version of our defense. And these two teams across the board are just so evenly matched.
I mean, I'm looking kind of at their stats, and you have the Seahawks, who are 3rd in points. The Rams are 5th in points. You have the Rams, who are 2nd in points against, and you guys are 5th in points against. So in that aspect, you're very similar. I posted this week on our channel, when you look at the sack numbers, you guys lead with 32 sacks versus our 27. We have, you have more interceptions than us by 3. We have more forced fumbles by 6 on you guys. But tackles for loss, you guys also have, about just less than 20 more tackles for loss than we do. So it's just fascinating to see how kind of equally these teams are. I think it's really going to come down to Sam Darnold and his confidence coming back from 2 hits from the Rams, really hard hits last year, when he was with the Vikings. And can he overcome that? Can he overcome, facing off against Byron Young and Jared Verse again? Plus adding, Poona Ford and all those characters to it. It's just going to be really interesting to see this matchup.
The interesting part of that, the Sam Darnold conversation, and when I went back and watched his 2 games versus you guys last year, I've done that twice this week already and dove into the all-22. Kevin O'Connell did two things that drove me nuts in that game, and something he still does. Like, I'm not a massive Kevin O'Connell fan. I think he designs some good things, but I think as a play caller, sometimes he gets a little too cute with things and doesn't help out his quarterback enough. There were way too many deep concepts built into his offensive game plans to take you guys on, especially in that second matchup when both of their starting tackles were out and that offensive line was in shambles. And Sam Darnold got sacked, I think it was 9 times in that game, and just got beaten up throughout the entirety of it. And it was very similar to what Kevin O'Connell did to Carson Wentz this year that put him on IR. Again, there was just nothing easy in that passing game to get your quarterback into rhythm. And that's something I'll say Clint Kubiak does so well is, I think for Sam in this game, having Charles Cross and Abe Lucas will give him a little bit of a sigh of relief going, yeah, I've got my good bookend tackles here. I might be okay. But it's the fact that with this receiving core, you have guys that if you just get the ball into their hands quickly, they can make a guy miss. JSN can make a guy miss. Rashid Shaheed can make a guy miss. You know, Cooper Kupp, as you guys know, can still make guys miss in space. Those type of things of just for a quarterback being able to turn and just throw a quick screen and get it out of your hand and get it to a guy and let him get 5 yards because he shakes the tackle are things he wasn't afforded last year, which he will be afforded this year in this offense and has already, you know, kind of been able to do. So to your point, Zach, like it is going to be fascinating to see if he does get pressured and if he does get pushed around a little bit, what does Clint Kubiak do to keep him in rhythm instead of letting him get out of rhythm?
Yeah, and from the Rams' point of view, can you put pressure early in the game and try to get in his mind? And I'll be interested to see what Shula does from his point of view, because he's been bringing like these teams are so similar. He's been bringing exotic blitzes to corner and safeties, rushing on and pulling back a D lineman and stuff like that. Most of the time, we're only rushing 4 and getting pressure. So if you guys can keep them clean and a lot of quick outs and stuff like that, similar to what the 49ers did in the first game against us, and you can stay ahead of us points wise and kind of play the clock, that's the best way I could see the Seahawks team winning and trying to play possession football. I don't know how often you guys have done that, just because like a lot of teams you have been able to jump on haven't really had threatening offenses. You know what I mean? To be able to climb back into the game. You can just kind of sit on them and slow play them the rest. We can have explosives even when we're down a score or two. So it'll be kind of interesting to see how Mike plays that.
It will be interesting. And to your point about the pressure, like Sam this year currently is completing 76% of his passes versus pressure. And he's getting blitzed 30% of the time right now in his dropbacks, which is one of the higher numbers in the NFL. And it's due to that stacked boxes look. So he's actually this year, weirdly enough, one of the best quarterbacks compared to probably what he was last year in some respects against pressure. So it'll be interesting to your point to see what does Shula do? Does he come out and pressure early? Or does he try and see if he can bait Sam into a throw where he thinks it's pressure and back out of it? I've got a question for you guys, though. How confident are you in your secondary versus JSN and Rashid Shaheed and the Seattle weapons?
Whew, that's a great question.
They're going to get yards. They're going to get yards. This defense is not a good, like, it's not very good in between the 30s of limiting yardage. You can move in the 30s relatively easy. They play a lot of soft zone. They're going for more like knockouts, turnovers in that area, trying to make it difficult. The big thing is they're trying to get you frustrated and into the red zone, and that's where they kind of make their money. And then they apply pressure and try to get you in 3rd and long, and then bring the house with 4 or 5 rushers. So
yeah, they try to. Sometimes they try to
it.
play a little too cute. They try to undercut it to try to jump on the ball for an interception rather than just either deflect it or pass break up a little bit. We've seen that a couple of times. So there is some concern. I mean, I still think that we have top tier safeties that are able to help, kind of keep up a little bit better. And I don't think you're going to get any crazy long plays or, long scoring plays, but I think you're going to be able to move the ball efficiently. But we say this all the time, and this has been true for the Rams for a very long time, is that they're very much of a bend don't break defense. They'll let you get the field goal, but it's very hard to score points in the end zone, and that's for what we've seen. I've kind of seen some of the comments, and the Rams have faced good offenses. We faced the Eagles, we faced the Colts. We have gone up against some good offenses, and we're still able to maintain them. We've gone up against running backs. I mean, shoot, we could keep Jonathan Taylor quiet. CMC has been quiet. We got Saquon Barkley was pretty quiet that game. We have a great defense. Our secondary is obviously our biggest concern, and we usually utilize our pass rush to really hit home and try to alleviate some of that stress on the secondary.
Yeah, you can definitely see limitation personnel wise because of where the cornerbacks will be positioned, and they much rather give up the 7 or 8 yard out route or 7 or 8 yard curl versus like a 15 to 20 yard slant or anything like that. So it's going to be a lot of pushback zones, and it drives us nuts until it gets to the red zone. But we're just used to it by now, just because of the personnel, especially with Kello being out. And you've seen a lot of AJ Brown did this. They can get outmanned because they're shorter corners. They are good. They are relatively good when they're close enough to break the ball up. But it's going to be an issue if you have bigger. How big is Shaheed? I forget.
Shaheed's 6 foot. To be honest, the one guy I think that's going to be the interesting matchup piece in this passing game amongst your JSN, your Cooper Kupp, your Shaheed is going to be Elijah Arroyo, because one thing they've started to do more is split him into the slot, and he's too big for a safety because he's I think he's 6'5", 6'6" guy. Like, he's big. He's like 250 pounds, but he can move, and he's too quick for a linebacker. And they've started to finally exploit that a little bit more in Seattle, which when they drafted him, that's what I was so excited about. I was like, cool, you've got this really interesting move tight end that you can split out. So you can come out in a traditional 12 personnel look with your 2 tight ends in line, and then shift him into the slot and see how a defense adjusts in their, big nickel. Is it that guy that walks out? Like, he can be a bit of a matchup nightmare. And to your point, you guys have said, your safeties are really good and stuff. This is where I feel like Elijah Arroyo, because there's going to be so much attention paid to Shaheed, JSN, Cooper Kupp, and those weapons more on the outside, that he might be able to actually have a bigger game on the inside between the numbers and the hashes than maybe most people are expecting and not actually accounting for.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that.
I was going to say, just wait for the landman punch out, though.
Yeah.
He needs his next one.
I would say the Rams have the same thing with Ferguson, where I could see the same thing vice versa. And that's where, you could almost see a mirror game from both offenses against both defenses, and it's going to be a critical turnover or not. But like I said, I think these are both great teams. They're both going to get to at least a divisional. And, hopefully it is not a 3-0 type game. I think we all can agree we don't want to watch that. We want to have a nice 30-31 shootout, and may the best team that plays the best 60 minutes win it.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I've got a feeling this game might be lower scoring than most people anticipate. Not that low of 3-0, but I think it might be lower scoring than we're actually anticipating.
I mean, you have 2 really great defenses, so it's gonna be a fascinating game. I miss Cooper Kupp. We didn't get to talk about him too much this episode, but it was sad for me to go. I'm probably one of the biggest Cooper Kupp fans around, and I still think he has some juice left in him. I understand why the Rams had to do it. Makes sense business wise, but there's that personality a little bit, and Cooper Kupp's one of the best for sure. Bryce, I know we're wrapping things up a little bit. Do you want to plug anything to our fan base that is listening?
Yeah, if your fan base likes listening to Seahawks content,
Seahawks Rams week.
That's fair. I run the Hawk's Eye podcast. You can find it on YouTube. It's on Spotify. You can find me on Twitter at the Seahawks Eye. I've got a couple shows that I've obviously released this week. I had one with Blaine Grisak, who runs the turftimes.com and the Rams Call Sheet podcast. So I had him on for a preview show. I did a preview show last night, more Seahawk focused in that one. Looking forward to that game, and I'll have a live reaction show following Sunday's matchup. So looking forward to it. And again, yeah, thanks guys for having me on. Appreciate coming over here and talking Seahawks and Rams.
Yeah, we'll have to do it again here, just over a month for the next game.
For sure.
Cool. All right, well, everybody, thank you guys for joining us live. You can always find us live, youtube.com/@EastCoastRams. You can also find us live on X as well. We stream there too, at East Coast Rams. We are also on Instagram and Threads at East Coast Rams Pod. And yeah, it's going to be a fun game. Home in SoFi Stadium, wearing the midnight blue jerseys. And I know, Ashton, roll your eyes, it's fine. And we cannot wait for the Rams to kind of sneak in that win. But I know it's going to be a great game. You can find Ashton at RamFanAshton1, and you can find me at Zach Mayer on X. We will see you guys after the game. See you, everyone.